Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to this week's video. In this week's video, we're going to be taking a look at the enhanced input system. That is the new input method for Unreal after version 5.03. So from 5.11, this is what you'll probably be using. If you've already used Unreal 5.11, you'll probably have already seen it. The input system looks a lot more daunting and a bit more confusing, but actually it's very similar. It just gives you some more flexibility. It gives you the ability to sort of not just have like a press and release. You can have different states, whether something's triggered, whether something's been cancelled by another functionality, and it's a pretty good way. What I'm going to do is I'm not too sure on the length of this video, but this may end up being a multi-part series. Today I might just focus on my priority is to focus on creating new inputs, getting them into the input manager, and then actually putting them in a blueprint and having some functionality. So with that being said, let's just jump straight into it, and we'll see how it goes, and then maybe we can talk about some of the extra features that it offers. So what I've got is just a basic third-person template using 5.11, and what this sort of starts off with is just your basic inputs of movement and a jump. That's pretty much it at this point, but we're going to add some extra layers to it. Now, in previous Unreal versions, what you would have done is you would have gone to your project settings, you would have gone to input within the engine, and you'd have added these action mappings. Now, notice there is a notice here at the top saying that it's now depreciated. Please use the enhanced input actions. But if you're really struggling, you can still use this system. They just don't recommend it. So don't feel that it's gone, but at some point it probably is going to be removed from the engine. I could only imagine once they've depreciated something, they're not going to keep holding on to it. But if you are really, really struggling and you don't want to get into it just yet, you do have the ability to use this. But anyway, getting back to things, you would have set up an action mapping here and specified what the name of it is and then what button would trigger it. Now, we don't have that anymore, or we're not going to use that anymore, but instead the input is all based on the enhanced player input, which is sort of built in by default. So there's no real reason to go into your project settings for this anymore. It should already be set up if you're using a template. If you're not, you're going to have to create a sort of... Oh, what have I done with it? You're going to have to create an input class. But I think even on the blank Unreal, I've not verified this, but I feel like even on the blank version, they should have something defaulted in here, realistically. Anyway, that being said, you don't need the project settings for this, so don't worry about that too much, but I just thought I'd cover that. But if you have opened up a template, what you will notice is you've got your blueprints, inputs, and maps now. So this inputs folder is what the default setup looks like. So if we open up the IMC is just the input. I like to call it the input map manager, but it's an input mapping context. It's basically any sort of inputs that you create, whether it's sprint, whether it's jump, they will all be held here in sort of like a manager. This is where all of the inputs that you want to have in your game go, and that's where you can assign the button presses. So that's that. But then also what you need to do is where you press new action mapping in the legacy system, you now have an actions folder where you can make specific inputs. Now, this is good in a way. If you think about it, let's say you make quite a lot of projects, maybe you're trialing some stuff. If you make like a nice sort of input system, one thing I personally hated was I make quite a lot of projects, obviously doing the YouTube channel, and to be able to just import a default handful of actions would be really useful for me. So I could have like sprint and crouch sort of like exported, and I can just import it into new projects and I don't have to remake them. Now granted, it's not a lot of work, but there's some use cases. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a sprint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this sprint. So before I do that, let me just delete it from my manager, which I'll talk over all this in just a minute, so don't worry too much about what I'm doing there. But just know that I am going to delete it from that, and then we'll make another one. So I've already made like a slide and a crouch. The jump, the look, and the move were defaults. So let's have a look at the jump because it's quite a simple one to go over. Essentially, all this is IA jump. Does it consume the input, which means if I press spacebar, for example, when I press spacebar, can the spacebar then trigger other events within the game, or does this jump action consume that spacebar, and that's the only thing it can be used for? Triggered when paused. If your game's paused, can you still trigger it, which is pretty neat because you can actually change that within the blueprint. Which type of value is it? Now, if you are familiar with sort of like how your mouse works, you can either have it via axes, which is basically X or Y. So if you move the mouse up and down, you're going to get a value of is it moving up, is it moving down? Or like a jump, has spacebar been pressed? Yes or no, true or false. So for a jump, this is a boolean, it's digital, it's yes or no. But you do have those axes which give you, so for example, a 1D axis, that'll either be +1 or -1. So you can say the mouse X or Y. If I'm moving to the left, it's 1. If I'm moving to the right, it's -1. So you could use those. I've not come across a need for the 2D and 3D just yet, but they're available if you need them. So that's jump, but let's make this sprint. It's quite a simple one to make. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click and we're going to go to input, and then you've got input action. So we'll select that. Just for naming convention, let's put IA_sprint. And once you've done that, we'll just double click it and open it. So the action description again is just going to be sprint. We want it to consume input. Just by default, this is a good practice to have because it saves the sprint key then being able to activate things you're not aware of. If you need to double up on stuff, you can come back and remove this, but for default I would leave it like that. We don't need anything else really. We don't really need anything else for a sprint, but I will go over the modifiers and the triggers in just a minute, but I'll do that from the manager. And we also want the value type to be a boolean because we want to know, right, have I pressed the shift key, for example, yes or no, and then we can trigger a sprint based on that. So essentially the only thing we've changed there is the description, but that's if you just want an on-off button press, and that's nice and simple. So we'll close that. So next what we need to do is we need to go back a folder and we need to open up this IMC default. Let's open that up. So now what you can see is very similar to the action mappings within the project settings. You've got these different mappings, and when you open them up you can see which buttons can actually trigger them. So this bit should feel very familiar to the project settings, but we've got a couple here already set up, but we just want to add a new mapping, so let's add a new one. So here where it says none, we're just going to drop down and pick our sprint, so let's select that. Currently there is no key associated to this event, so let's just change that. So I want to go keyboard and I want to find left shift. So there we go, left shift. Alternatively, obviously you can search left shift, but I just chose the hardware for absolutely no reason. So once we've got that, it's pretty much ready to use. How you would then go on to use this in your blueprint would be the same as it previously would. However, it's going to look a bit different, so we'll get to that in just a sec. But what I want to just mention is that previously when you was making this sprint option, you had the ability to sort of bake in some modifiers and triggers. Now, unless you're absolutely certain you want those, I would recommend doing it within the IMC, because this is like a central place that you can just see all of your modifiers, and if something has something naturally baked in, it's just one more step to go into. Unless you like I said, unless you know you need that modifier, I'd just add them in here. It makes it a bit easier. Player mappable. I haven't needed to use this. I like to specify what key mapping it is here, but there is mappable, just exposes which buttons pressed, and you can edit it on the fly. Again, I think that makes things, in a sense, I think that might make it easier for editable key layouts, but I haven't tested that, so I don't want to quote that, but that's my assumption. So let's then go on to the blueprint and let's add this sprint into the game. So again, I'm gonna, in the contents folder, I'm gonna go to third person. I'm gonna go to blueprints, and I'm just gonna open up my third person character. Okay, so nothing's really changed here. I've not added anything else to it. So what you can see here is up at the top, this is just the default. What they're doing is on event begin play, they're just checking to make sure that the input system is actually valid, and then it kind of maps this to the subsystem. I wouldn't worry too much about this. I've not needed to mess around with this in any way whatsoever. But here's the first look at what the input action side of things actually looks like. So we've got an enhanced input action, IA look. Now this one is controlled off the mouse for wherever the mouse goes, and this one is actually set up as a, let's just double check. I'm certain that this is just a vector. Let's go into it the other way, go to actions, and we'll go to look. So this is set up as an axis 2D. So let's get rid of that. So where are we? So we've got value X and value Y. So basically it's taking both of those X and Y values of the mouse simultaneously, which I guess is an upgrade from the previous system, which would have a look forward and look right axis mapping, so it would have had to separate those previously. So that's pretty neat. That's a good example use case of where you'd use the axis 2D for tracking two values at the same time, and then once that movement is triggered, once I move the mouse, it's inputting that into the character controller to sort of make the camera move around, And very similarly, we have the movement input, and that's pretty much the same. We've got an X value and a Y value, and they're going to be assigned to the W key, WAS and D keys, and based on whether they are, if A is pressed or not, it's going to be a positive or a negative number, which would sort of contribute to the movement input. And you can see we've got left and right, which would be triggered based off the A and D keys, and then W and S would do the forward and backwards. Again, jump is triggered once you press the space bar, and this simply just says if triggered, let's jump. Once it's complete or the key is released, we will stop jumping. So you can picture triggered and complete as pressed and released. You've obviously got this extra layer of detail here, where if something's ongoing and it's still being processed, whether it's been cancelled, because let's say you are sprinting and you hit jump, you could interrupt the sprint mechanic. At that point, then it would become cancelled, and if you want to sort of have a feedback loop from that, if you want to have an event from an interrupted action, you can do. Maybe sprint and jump wasn't the best example because I've nothing really to lead on with it, but there will be a use case for that, but I haven't thought of one ahead of time, so I'm not going to waste time scratching my head for one. So with that, let's add our own sprint. So what we're going to do is we're going to do IA and then sprint. Sorry, spell it right. Sprint. And you can see we've got two. So we've got action values. That's just going to be the true or false that it returns, or the actual event itself, which gives you the ability to tap into all of it. So we'll select that. And you can see that we've got this big scary event. So again, we've got triggered or pressed, or complete or released. And then we've got the action value, was it true or false, which input action fired it, and let's see what's under here. How much time has elapsed, how quick was it triggered, and so on. So there's quite a lot of data here that you can take from an input system, and I guess that'd be quite useful in sort of like maybe games where there's combo hits or where you require sort of quick button presses, and maybe you need to track the time between presses. I guess in a sense like a double click would be quite simple to set up from this. If you double click D, it does a side shift rather than just a move, as an example. But anyway, so we have triggered sprint, we've pressed our left shift. So what we need to do now is we need to make a difference to our sprint, our character speed. So for that, it's real simple. We're just going to get a character movement component, set max walk speed, like that. What we'll do is we'll just duplicate that while we're here, and let's just plug that in because we're going to need to reset it once we've released the key. So once we've triggered it, we want our walk speed to be doubled, so let's just put 1200, and when it's complete or released, we're just going to set that back to 600. And that's pretty much it for the action. So let's compile that, let's press play, and now if I hit shift, you can see that my character now sprints across the map, and if I release, it goes back. So shift, release, shift, release. So nice and simple, and the timing doesn't look too bad. I reckon I could squeeze a few more bits and pieces in here. So just quickly getting onto modifiers, some that could be useful. If we go back to the IMC default, let's just add a modifier onto this. So let's just click and add a modifier, and then at the moment it says none. Now there are sorry, it's not going to be a modifier, a trigger, so my apologies. So let's start with trigger because modifiers do take a bit more time to explain, but triggers, these are kind of like trigger extensions. So we've already got the trigger key, but we can say we need that key to be held for a certain amount of time to do anything. So you could have like a built-in charge time. Let's say, I mean, what a good one would be the hold and release for jump, where when you're pressing it, if you remember back to here, the elapsed seconds, you could have sort of like a how powerful should my jump be based on the time that's gone by and the button being held. So you could have a hold and release, which is pretty neat. But we're just going to use hold as an example for this video, just because it's quite simple to explain. So basically, whichever button you've specified here, left shift, needs to be held for a required period of time. So if we drop this down, we'll see what that actually is. So it needs to be held for at least 1 second. Now I'm just going to change that to 5 seconds just to make it a bit more obvious that it is actually 5 seconds. And then you can, you know, is it a one shot? Should it be triggered every frame? I mean, to be fair, I'm just reading the card there. That's self-explanatory. You probably don't want jump to be jump. But the way that the enhanced the enhanced inputs event is set up, that wouldn't happen anyway. So this only occurs once after being triggered, and then complete again only happens once, so that's absolutely fine. So let's hold it for 5 seconds. Affected by time dilation. If you've ever used time dilation, it basically, that's the thing that you can create like a slow-mo effect should this key be affected by it. So your 5 seconds with like a half time dilation would become 10 seconds. Do you want that to be true, or do you just want it to ignore it? And then an actuation threshold. That's basically once this 5 second is reached, what sort of how much longer after that should the action be triggered. So let's save that. We've added a 5 second delay to it. Let's now press play. So I'm going to be pressing shift now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there you go. You can see that the sprint is now activated. So you can have certain things set up where you need these sort of, you've got the key to be pressed, but there's these kind of, I prefer them to be called modifiers, but they're not actually modifiers. I'd say they're kind of like trigger attributes. They are secondary conditions along with the button press. So it's not just press this button, it's press this button and hold it for this time. And there's quite a few in here. Is the key being pulsed, fires at intervals, taps, and stuff like that. So you've got seconds that it needs to be hitting. And one of my other favourites, what time are we on? 21, that's fine. One of my other favourites is combo. Combo's pretty neat. This is how I've created. I'll actually go around this and I'll just explain the slide that I've made. I deleted it. Let's have a look. No, I didn't delete it. So I've got a input action called slide. Now, slide doesn't necessarily do anything, but it does. It pushes the character forward, but it's not triggered by a key. But what it is triggered by is a combination. So my combination is 2 actions. So let's just drop these down. Okay, so because I deleted my sprint, this has actually undone it. But let me just explain this line by line. Let me just add my sprint back in. So we've got a trigger. My trigger's a combination. The combo actions that I've got set up is a crouch and a sprint. So basically what that's saying is the slide can be triggered if both the crouch and the sprint are activated simultaneously. So the good thing about this is if you're sprinting and you add a crouch to it, both of them are being used simultaneously, and you will then go into a slide, which is really neat. To be fair, that's pretty much it. That's just a good example of it. So you can be crouching and sprinting at the same time, and you'll go into a slide. Unfortunately, I have removed that from my blueprint ahead of this video, just so there was no extra stuff here. You're kind of in a sprint. Sorry, you're in a crouch with a sprint speed for a few seconds, and then you stand back up. One other thing that it has is a cancel action. So if we are sliding, it can be cancelled if somebody hits jump. So if I hit spacebar whilst I'm in this, this slide will be cancelled, and that's where this cancelled node would trigger, and then you can run something else off it, for example. Now, I'm just having a think. The cancelled might be pretty neat if you are using the slide. If you are using the slide, let's say this is triggered. I'm currently sliding. If it's cancelled, I might want to re-equip a weapon. So, for example, I think Fortnite does this. If you are sliding, it actually switches you to your sort of melee weapon, your what do you call it? Harvesting tool is what they call it. Now, when your slide is cancelled or complete, you want it to switch back to your gun. So if you've got sort of a function or something that triggers that action, you could just say, if it's cancelled, switch back to your main weapon. So that's probably a good example of how that is. Right, I think I'm going to start rambling at this point. I'm looking at the time, we're at 25 minutes. I don't want to go over half an hour. So I hope I didn't overkill the explanation on those parts, but if you want the extra detail, I hope it helps. Let me know in the comments if this could have just been made shorter, and I might just make a really condensed version of this is how to make stuff. If you've made it this far anyway, I guess you've already learned that, but thanks for watching. If you did like it, consider giving me a like, a thumbs up. If you was to comment down below, I would reply to every message. I do appreciate people's comments, even if it's just to say thanks, you helped me out. That really does help me, it helps the channel, and it gives me reasons to continue posting. If you want me to talk about something in more detail, pop that down below, and I'll try and get back to you. I'll either have the information, or it'll be an incentive to making a video about it. Also, if you want to join the Discord group, I'll put a link to that down below as well. There's a handful of us which, we're all like-minded. We're all on this learning journey of Unreal. If you've got any problems, you can chuck them into Discord. I usually respond within, pretty quick to be honest, but at the latest I'd say within a day. And the benefit of Discord is I can send screenshots and I can send links to videos and stuff like that. A bit easier than using the comments. But that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another one.